Hello and welcome, everybody. Are you having a nice hump day? It's Wednesday, and we have Seeking Sustainability Live number 19 today with a very special guest, Melanie. Thank you so much for joining. It's such a
Thank you.
pleasure to have you here.
Number 19, like that.
19. Yeah. I listened to your TED Talk. I'll show a screenshot of
Go.
it. And you were saying you came to Japan when you were 17. Is that right?
I know. Yeah, 17, 1982.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, 1982. And I was 17. I turned 18 while I was here.
Okay, I've got a screenshot here. So you were talking even then. Your TED Talk was all about understanding women, and that was before you did the project as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was actually, that TED Talk was before. I guess, yeah, I wonder whether I thought about that. Not sure. Don't know. But it sort of made me look back at some of the women that I'd had a lot to do with. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Great background. You should have that link on your website. I had to go and search for it on my own.
What I need is for you to be in charge of my personal branding, you
Oh,
see,
okay.
because
I can do that. I
I've
can do that.
forgotten that it was even there.
And would you like to introduce yourself briefly? Go ahead.
I'm number 19.
Yes, you
My
are.
name is Melanie Brock, and I met Joy when she helped me out greatly with our Celebrating Women in Japan project. I'm Australian. I'm from a small town called Albany in Western Australia, and I've lived here in Japan for nearly 30 years, I think it is. 1 year in Hachinohe and the rest in Tokyo now. Mm.
And I'm showing pictures of your beautiful family. You're a grandma now.
I am. I've got three littlies, one boy who's 5, one little girl who's 3, and our little one is a year and a half just the other day.
Oh, they're gorgeous. Are they back in Australia?
So my younger son is in Australia, and my older son is here, and he works with me, which
Okay.
is fun and games. But yeah, so it's been tricky through the whole coronavirus. I'd
Yeah.
actually taken the whole family home, and we were there until the 16th of March. We returned on the 17th here, so we were really, really lucky that we could go home, and that there was no reason for us not to be there, type of
Yeah.
thing.
Did you have to be in
But
quarantine while you were there?
no, it was well before that.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, I was the queen of timing, good timing. So it was
Yeah,
great.
really
Yeah,
lucky.
yeah, very lucky.
Yeah. So that's nice. You've got some family here while you're social distancing. If people want to know more about you, probably the best place is your official website,
Yeah, that's
melaniebrockjapan.com, right?
com. Yeah, that's probably the best one. And even that, I look at it and I think, oh, we could tell people about that, or we could tell people about this and what have you. But it probably has the most, it has about what my work is. Probably my Twitter feed is a combination of my work and family-ish and my,
Passion.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to
Uh,
talk a lot about your tweets later.
oh, yeah.
We're longtime Twitter friends. No, but your tweets are so inspiring, and I think the things that you tweet are a big indication of your stance on gender equality and things like that. So we're gonna talk about manels and things like that a bit later.
Oh man, I get into trouble for that.
Only the good ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I introduced your YouTube talk. If you search Melanie Brock Japan, you can find that TED Talk. And
Thank you.
you're part of the AANZCJ. Do you want to introduce that and what you guys do?
Yeah. So the chamber, it's the Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Japan. The chamber is by virtue of that, it's a 2-country chamber. It's got Australia and New Zealand, and primarily the old folks, the old blokes, tell me that that happened because the number of Australians and the number of New Zealanders here in the 70s, when they looked to set up the chamber, there weren't enough of both probably. So they decided, look, we can be together and, whatever, which has worked really well. I think that it's a great combination. And I was chair for about 6 and a bit years, and now I'm what's called chair emeritus, which I've been told means old soldier. So basically that's my role. Our chair now is Sally Townsend, and she's terrific. She's done a great deal of work building up the Chamber's networks with Japan. And before her, we had Andrew Gauchi, who's the CEO of a major Australian business here in Japan too. So the Chamber does a lot of advocacy work for Australian, New Zealand and Japanese businesses. It's got a strong community focus too, which is important, and great history.
Is this where you had the connection to Rugby World Cup as well? Was it through this?
Yeah, and the Rugby World Cup was a big part of the chamber, especially because it was Australia and New Zealand.
Right.
That was the real battleground, of course. And we always had a lot of talk about how rugby was going to be the moment where we had issues, but New Zealand showed their prowess, and we're very supportive of each other, I think. But yeah, Rugby World Cup was really important. I was just actually explaining it to a client in the UK, but in Japan, rugby was where is the sort of connection, the triangle connection of corporate politics and sport. And I felt that people were always saying things like, oh, it's a test run for the Olympics. But in fact, I think it was on its own a great, very special time for Japan. Yeah. So it was much more than just a test run or a practice.
Absolutely. And we were doing a lot of tourism consulting down here, and we were saying actually World Rugby Cup is probably bigger than the Olympics. Like,
well, I
massive,
think, for
right?
regional Japan, it was much more important, and I don't want to diminish the importance of the Olympics and the Paralympic movement, but I do think the Rugby World Cup, it being, having the focus in the right across Japan, and allowing for people to be part of that whole sort of festival was
Definitely.
Really special. I think.
Speaking of it being all across Japan, there was a really special area of Tohoku, Kamaishi. Yes. Where you want to introduce that a little bit? Because you were actually up there in Kamaishi, right?
That's right. And so Kamaishi is a really special part of Japan that was, it's interesting now, I have heard from my host families who have very strong connections in that town, that they took me there when I was 18, and of course I remember the area, but I didn't remember that I'd been there then. But I visited Kamaishi early on in 2011 in May after the tsunami, and so I sort of through the work that I was doing at the time had a lot to do with the Tohoku area, and I just became very close to a lot of the people in Minami Sanriku, in Kamaishi and in Itatemura, and other towns of course as well. But then when it became clear that the reconstruction for Kamaishi meant that they were going to be part of the Rugby World Cup, then we looked at ways that we could help them. And so the Chamber was really supportive. Lots of Australian and New Zealand companies were really committed. AIG brought some of the All Blacks, and we had Richie McCaw and Dan Carter, and so it was really terrific stuff. And just great to introduce people to the area. And since then, or at that time, then the mayor asked if I would like to be a sort of an ambassador for the town. So that's a great privilege for me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I remember years ago talking about tourism destination branding with my students. I was teaching tourism and business at the university level, and I found that amazing video about Kamaishi, and after the disaster, and the connection between the rugby players abroad and the rugby players in Japan, and rebuilding the town and supporting everybody. And it's so powerful and such a beautiful, like, short documentary film, right?
Oh, I think that reminds me, I've actually got a post one that they've just produced saying thank you to everybody.
Oh,
But
nice.
I agree that video is, and you know, we were lucky enough to be up there for the first match at the stadium, I think it was, and I'd also been there ahead of time. So yeah, I've been up quite a lot, but at different sort of moments, I've noticed the shift or that took place where, you know, the great grief that people were feeling in the early times sort of shifted to a lot of complex feelings about how people would um, deal with their own feelings around the reconstruction of that stadium, the rebuild of the stadium and the area, of course, putting a lot of money into sport as opposed to potentially helping out building up the town, but of course knowing that the sport would bring people to the town, you know, and then watching everybody come to terms with that and some not, and how they all work together to sort of then have this amazing match.
Oh,
And then, of course, the second match was washed out because of that typhoon, and that was heartbreaking.
oh
But
yeah.
even in spite of that, the Fisher, the fleet flags that they have, the
Yeah.
fisherman flag, I mean, they all walked onto the ground and everybody went there. So it's such a like, I mean, you know that from where you're based. There's like regional Japan is really so undersold.
Yeah.
You know, for so many different things that you couldn't find in a tourism sort of pamphlet, but it's so fantastic. I'm a big
Absolutely.
fan.
That was a
Yeah,
great part of the movie when they talk about every ship has its own flag, and all
yeah,
those flag
yeah,
bearers, the fishermen who lost their boats,
yeah,
are at the rugby field cheering on the rugby game,
yeah.
and it has
It was,
become more
yeah,
important after
yeah,
the devastation.
absolutely, yeah. And I think, you know, I remember, you know, at the match, when they had the flyover, and you know, there was a few announcements in English, and then suddenly somebody I think said that one of the pilots was a child when the tsunami happened, and it was particularly important, obviously, for the town that the Blue Impulse flyover was piloted by one of these young, you know, boys from the town who's now a grown bloke, you know. I
Wow.
mean, so it's still now so poignant. But, you know, you just want to do everything you possibly can to help through tourism, but through maybe partnerships around sport or, you know, business potentially. But, you know, and in what you're doing too, in sustainable tourism, I think is really special in those areas
Hmm.
because it's, you know, it's agriculture, it's Japan's greatest moment, isn't it? You know, it's terrific.
Definitely. And
Yeah,
yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for outdoor sports kind of
yeah,
tourism. And yeah, it's a
yeah.
beautiful, beautiful area.
And, you know, camps or like, you know, if visiting teams come and then they can spend 2 weeks in the area and then they learn a little bit of Japanese, they learn a little bit about, you know, Japanese food and the people, and then they can still do sport and they're not in a city.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, and there's nothing wrong with Tokyo.
Yeah,
It's a great home, but it's, you know, it's not regional Japan really has so much going for it.
definitely. Plus, that was your first experience, right?
Exactly. So I
In
sort
that
of,
area.
and it's interesting for me, when the earthquake happened, because it happened, you know, obviously in those three, mostly in those three prefectures, when I went up to Tohoku very early on in the golden week of 2011, I went with my closest friend Nula, and when we arrived in Fukushima, um, both Nula's fluent in Japanese too, and we're sort of, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is the dialect, or it's a version of the dialect, and so I was able to interpret a lot when people came up who could speak perfect Japanese, but they were like, I don't understand what's going on here because it's deep, deep, you know,
Wow,
Japan. So it all came back for me,
that's
and so
great.
my accent and dialect became part of the piece.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Mm.
interesting. Like I grew up in Hawaii, so I would take my kids back to Hawaii sometimes. And the local Japanese Americans who were Nisei Sansei third
Yeah.
generation, they would say my kids Japanese, because of course my kids raised in Japan speak Japanese from
Yeah.
Hiroshima area. that their dialect was much more familiar to them because that was their grandmother's dialect or their
Oh,
mother.
wow.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of
Yeah.
people went from the Hiroshima area to work in the fields
To
or,
Hawaii.
yeah,
Oh, that's interesting.
that is
Yeah,
interesting.
I mean, the Aomori, you know, there are two sections. You know, there's the Tsugaru, which is the Aomori city, and then there's Nambu, which is the southern part of Aomori. And I was in Hachinohe, which is the southern. But I could quickly tell. I mean, it was the first Japanese I learned. But I could pick up from, you know, after a while that I was speaking this part of it, and that I knew that the other one was really difficult. But I remember when we had friends coming from Hachinohe to Tokyo, people would sort of really take the mickey out of them for their very sort of like, you know, strong dialect. And now, of course, the TV, you know, NHK, you know, all of the TV programs and what have you. But I think that there should be a greater push to sort of save the dialects because they'll actually just fade away if we're not careful. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe if we had more stronger dialects spoken on NHK or radio, not just the Tokyo version. That's starting to happen in America or BBC. You're starting to hear stronger accents, right?
And even on the Australian, you do. We've got a Scottish, you know, journalist, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I do remember Japanese saying to me, you know, that the dialect that Tokyo people spoke was NHK no kotoba. So it was NHK speak, you know. So there was this great, you know, difference that, you know, I had to learn to know.
Yeah.
But where I went back to Australia after the year, and my Japanese teacher at university, she got me to stay back after the first class. And I remember her, she's just this last year passed away, but she said to me, do you want to use Japanese in a professional setting? And I sort of thought, well, of course, you know, I love Japanese. After I, you know, got stuck into it, I really just loved it. So I enrolled in university in Japanese, and I said, yes, I think, yes, whatever that means, you know, professional, whatever. And she said, in which case, you're going to have to change that dialect. Like, it simply isn't going to, you need to understand that there's a place for that, but the Japanese that you're going to use in work is going to be a very different Japanese. And so I have her to thank for a very clear sense that it was not how I was going to get on. So she had me stay back every class, and she helped me fix up my sing-songy Japanese because I was very, you know, it would just sort of.
So she wasn't only talking about keigo and polite Japanese. She was talking about your pronunciation and words. Sometimes there's different words too, right?
Totally. All the words that the girls at school had taught me were simply not appropriate, she said. So I remember thinking, oh, right, I have to do this all again, you know, but I'm very grateful because I learnt the sort of part of the language that is really special. Yeah.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about some of your other work. You're on the board with SEGA.
That's right.
And they have a very nice CSR page. Do you want to talk a little bit about what they do for CSR?
Yeah. So are you talking about the piece in Tohoku?
I'm not sure. On the official website, they have their CSR page talking about reforestation and promotion of culture, and it seems like a pretty proactive company, and they have a
it is, yeah. They have a particular project that I've had a bit to do with, and that's in Tohoku. And so basically, I think after the earthquake, a lot of people wanted to do what they could, and everybody was really committed. But as SEGA Sammy found out that, you know, it's all very well that we say from a Tokyo sort of centric view, this is what is going to be suitable for a small company in say, Tohoku to be engaged in. they felt that it was better that we send some of our people. So we've got, I think, 3 people seconded who are working within the organisation, getting links with the regional organisation, the local government, and then they're working out how they could market and how they can be involved in reforestation and the like. So it's really a sort of more embedded approach to the CSR. And I don't know if embedded is the right word, but it's really sort of
like
a direct
collaborative with local areas. Yeah.
And so staff have gone from the head office there, so that's terrific. And the other day in the shop, the small shop where you can buy, Sonic bits and pieces, they are selling the rice that has been harvested from that area in special packs. So that's sort of like a nice way that they can bring back some of those stories to the staff who don't have the chance to go up there. Yeah,
definitely. So this is SEGA, the game company, is it? Same?
That's right. So SEGA so SEGA Sammy Holdings is the company, and I was asked to join the main board last year. So it's coming up for a year. And SEGA or SEGA, I don't know, SEGA in Japanese, but SEGA in English potentially, I think, are celebrating their 60th anniversary in a week, I think. So obviously with coronavirus, some of those celebrations will be very different to what had been envisaged. And the new movie would have been out now and everything, but that's been pushed back a little bit too. But that's been really interesting.
Sonic the Hedgehog, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
It has Jim Carrey in it, right?
That's right.
It's quite a big deal.
I've seen the short. It looks very funny.
Yeah, it looks funny.
That should be quite
amusing. You are not only maybe the only woman on the board, but the only non-Japanese, is that right?
That's right. I'm the only woman and the only non-Japanese board member, and that's I think it's a courageous step that the organisation has taken. There is no, as you know, there's no quota set, for board diversity on boards. And so it's really up to, there's a general guideline that the government has asked for listed companies to be mindful of. But, at the moment, there are still many listed companies like there are in Australia. I think we've only got 30% of Australia's listed boards have more than one woman on them, I think. Yeah. Being the only woman and being the only non-Japanese means that I hit 2 diversity pieces on that. But so it's I do it all in Japanese, which is a struggle at times, because sometimes I'm not quite sure when I should be, chipping in more or not, or whether that's the right phrase to use, or if it's not an area that I'm particularly well versed in, like finance. Then I struggle, but I've learned a lot, and hopefully I can give something back to the organisation too.
I'm sure you do, and it's great that you're representing, another point of view, and I'm sure that's really valuable for them. It's great to see.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned so much about structure. I guess one thing that I have learned too is that I think a lot of people were suggesting that I should be, saying something at every board meeting, and that it was important that at least I say, that you make a comment of some sort each time. But I found that not to be the case, actually, and I watched my colleagues, and sometimes they don't. So I don't think it's a woman or a non-Japanese thing at all. I just think that everybody, doesn't have something to say about every issue. But I always feel I'm welcome to. That's good. I think it's, Oh no, I've been, I'm very much welcome to comment on anything, and it's a very open discussion. But I think there's this pressure sometimes for you to know, to be commenting on everything. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's something that I've learned as a big chatterbox. That's a good thing for me to learn.
I'm with you. It's hard sitting on my hands sometime to remind myself, don't butt in, just listen, girl.
I know. Well, exactly. That's what I tell my clients, and then I don't often do a lot of it. But anyway.
Another Australian group that you're a part of is Advance. Do you want to talk
Yes,
about
yeah.
advanced a little
That,
bit?
that's yeah. I've just been asked actually to be the global ambassador for that. Well, global ambassador for Japan, and
Congratulations. Yeah.
thank you. Advance is a really terrific group, and this morning we had a fantastic um, global digital roundtable. I think it was called town hall, and it was just terrific. We had some really gutsy Australians. We had the Australian ambassador to the United States, and we had some really solid sort of discussion around advanced manufacturing, space development, and agri. And it was a really interesting look at your own country, I guess, because that's what Advance is doing. Is it's a group that represents the diaspora of Australia, such that when keeping links with Australians who are overseas, so that when they go home to, start up living in Australia again, they bring back some of the expertise that they have, and that they know that those expertise are valued. Because sometimes in a small country like Australia, people tend to be like, oh, well, look, you might know people in I don't know, Vienna or whatever, but do you know anybody in Melbourne? And there's this pressure on people to, it's a small sort of community, I guess, in many ways.
Right.
So
I mean, to give some background, you have a lot of experience in this. You were doing import business with the meat industry for a long time, Australia,
yep,
Japan, right?
yeah. And I before I did that, I set up my own business here because I could tell that there was a big shift in Japanese consumption patterns, and I was possibly a little bit ahead of my time, or popped my cork too early or something. But we had a lot of businesses that we represented up here. We imported those products. Got Japanese restaurants and shops and department stores and hotels and what have you to help and to love those products. So we used to have some beautiful drinks in Natural Lawson, and biscuits in Dina DeLuca and stuff at Isetan, and I was really proud of that. But it was a really hard sell. It was very that was one of the busiest. I learned probably the most in my whole career in that time.
Right.
What not to do and what to do. But I met some fantastic people who I still see now, so that's great.
I thought that was a really nice part of your TED Talk when you're talking about doing the import business, and then everybody that you were dealing with were men in Japan, and you thought, there must be women who are doing this. I'm going to find them, and kept seeking out, not giving up. But it's a very male-dominated world, maybe even still now, right?
I remember when I first started working at the meat and livestock, we talked about taking down some buyers to Australia, and everybody said, you've got to go and get these companies, and they are exactly the biggest, buyers and great supporters of the industry, etc. And I said, and from my own background, but I knew that the decision makers at the supermarket and the decision makers in the restaurants are generally the women. It's, shall we eat at Royal Host tonight, or shall we eat at, yakiniku this, or shall we eat at that smaller
and
Japanese
for home
fish
finance too is usually the woman, right?
Totally. So, and of course, that's something that a lot of people overseas don't see, because they think that there's a lot more, discrimination than there is, or, well, in those areas at least, people think. And so I said, well, what about we go and find the people who are putting together the menus for the family restaurants, or let's go and find the businesses, the nutritionists who are working in the bigger companies, or some of the buyers, or some of the women who are working in the very traditionally like male-dominated sectors of the business. And everyone said to me, oh, no, that's not a very good idea. It's a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, well, and we worked around this idea that Japanese women in particular have very low iron levels, and they quite often have anemic tendencies and iron deficiencies. And of course beef, and I know there are other ways to get those that iron, but the beef has a lot of iron, and so we had this thing around iron beauties. And so we had 4 missions in the end, where we took these women from big different parts of the Japanese beef industry and food industry, and we took a media representative as well. And then we travelled to Australia and we showed them different parts of Australia and different parts of the beef operation. And I still see and talk to a lot of those women, but it was really powerful, I think, for probably more powerful for the women themselves, because they were then welcomed, like they were given a really like it was, people were recognizing and acknowledging the work that they were doing and the role that they had in the organization.
Giving them respect for what they know and what they do. That's all fantastic. You can ask.
Really, really tough stuff that they did, and I'm always grateful to that. That was a really interesting time.
Sometimes the hardest hurdles are the ones that teach you the most, right?
Totally.
There was, I don't know if it was through that organization, Advance, or maybe through your work with New Zealand Australian Chamber of Commerce, but there was this really nice tweet, you taking someone to the Tohoku Memorial.
Yeah. So this is my very good friend Sam Mostyn, who does some amazing stuff in Australia, and I couldn't even begin to tell you, how amazing her work is. But I was lucky enough to have Sam come up to launch Celebrating Women in Japan. And when Sam came up for that, I said, it worked out that it was going to be around the time of the memorial, or the anniversary of the earthquake and the tsunami. So we went up to Minami Sanriku, and I go there every year for the memorial. And this was, I think, the 7th year. I think I can't see that tweet, but I think it might be that.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam has had a lot to do with our former Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. And Julia Gillard was the first Prime Minister, or first head of government rather, to visit the Tohoku area after the earthquake. And so we sort of revisited an area where a colleague of Sam's had been, and our Prime Minister, and so it was very poignant. We also had great sushi with the mayor of the town. He should be the chef of the town, but he has always been a terrific supporter of Australia. And we, in fact, took him to Australia in 2000 I can't remember, 12, I think it was. And he met up with Julia Gillard again in Australia, and they because she was the sort of first one to come up and meet with him after the tsunami. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's very special.
Yeah, really a great memorial, a very respectful, very powerful experience. Just like we have every year in Hiroshima, it's a very powerful, deep experience, but it is also a very wonderful way to connect to local people and to show respect for what they've been through. And I think that is very true of the Tohoku area as well, right?
Yeah, and I remember that particular trip because we stayed in Matsuyama, I think it was, and then drove up the coast because I wanted Sam to see, where things had changed and how, and the rebuild, because it's so vast. And then we went to the memorial, and of course it's so powerful, as you say, and it's so moving. But I'm conscious that I'm a visitor, and it's there. I feel in Tohoku in particular, it's the one day that people are very quite demonstrative actually in their emotions, and I'm just a visitor, so I try and step back a little bit, but they always, and I saw this group of people from Kanagawa who every year have been up to Tohoku, and they called out to me as I was walking out of the ceremony, and I just burst into tears. And it's so ridiculous because they're not even from the area. But anyway, after that, Sam and I drove up to the little Minshiku where I normally would stay, And the woman there, she said, "Oh, we knew you'd come. We knew you'd come." And of course, then Sam and I are in tears again. So it's sort of it's quite an emotional thing for me. This year, of course, we couldn't commemorate, but next year's the 10th year. So I'm hoping that it's done and in the right way, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who want to share aspects. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it's very powerful, and it's very important to remember and not forget, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And in the right way, with no flash. And I'm sure there'll be media all over the place next year because it's the 10th, and then they won't come again for the 11th and the 12th and the la. But anyway, let's not be critical.
Yeah.
On a live feed.
Let's switch gears a little bit to your big project of last year, celebrating women of Japan. Massive endeavor that you completed. So you want to introduce that and how it started?
Well, I had been very lucky in that I was asked by Kirsten Ferguson in Australia if and she profiled me in her Celebrating Women project. And so at the time I thought, oh, it would be great to do the same for Japanese women and women in Japan. And I think I was talking to an old friend of mine, and she said, let's just do it. I think we should just, profile everybody. You could do it on Twitter or social media, build a sort of a community. And I remember thinking that it wasn't going to be the same profiling as what Kirsten did, because I felt that it might even give me a better understanding of what Japanese women would be looking for. So I felt that I could pose 3 questions. I also knew that Japanese women were less likely to respond to that sort of, branding, potential sort of advertising moment that, they could see it as. So maybe some questions and some advice that they could give to the next generation might be a way for them to buy in. So I asked 3 questions. So I think there was a little bit about what's your background and, who are you? And the second thing was, the second question was where do you see there being deficiencies, or what are the issues that are facing Japanese women, and where, because I was trying to draw out potentially from people what were their thing, like their things that they needed to focus on, or they felt we should be focusing on more. And then the third question was just, what advice do you give other women? And it was interesting that the advice part was exactly the same all the way through. It was, find women in the organisation and, help them be themselves, support women in the community. There was a lot of discussion around support, and somebody said to me, oh, sometimes you just wish you'd see other advice. And I thought, well, it was actually universal, the whole time it was that. But anyway, so we profiled people in Japanese and in English, because I thought it was important that
you did it very bilingual the whole way through.
I mean, if you'd asked me to do it again, I'm just going to have to say no. But because it was, I remember now, I had very fixed rules about when it would be posted, and of course at the end, I wasn't as fixed as that. But I do remember having lunch with a very important client, and I said, just wait a minute, I have to post Celebrating Women. And I just now I look back on it and I think, well, why didn't I learn how to schedule the bloody thing, or to even just do it at 12:30 instead of what was my problem? But at the start I was very, very, but I had a lot of support. I had, from your good self, from people who I know are watching today, were great in reminding me that I'd forgotten this, or that I had to have that focus, or there was some people that they knew. And I really wanted to cover regional and city sort of folk. I wanted to make sure that we had a whole range of people from different backgrounds, because the main point for me about this was that I wanted to show that people like just very average, doing their normal thing, women, were very good reason, it was a very good reason to celebrate them. You didn't have to be the top of the whizzer. You don't have to be fantastic, and doing fantastic things to be fantastic type of thing. So I don't know. That was a really special part of it, I felt, because sometimes I think that for Japanese women, there's a sense that, oh, I can't be that person because that person's got this amazing background, or that person studied overseas, or that person did that. And I sort of wanted to bring it down and make it a bit flatter about celebrating women for just what they do, which is amazing.
I thought that was a really beautiful concept. And the whole idea of, we all have a story to tell, and we all can inspire each other if we're, head of the government, or if we're delivering food or cleaning trains, like everybody has a place. Some of my favorite ones were like the women taxi drivers, or
I know. But I mean, I'd get in a taxi and it would be a woman, and I think, oh, that's my profile for today. And then I'd be like, oh, so if you were to have some advice for women, and then I'd say, oh, do you mind if I post this? And they're like, oh, random person, just get out of my taxi. But of course, they always agreed. Those people did. There were some people who I approached who didn't feel that they could be part of it. They felt that it was boasting.
Okay.
Or that they were bringing attention to themselves. They felt that it would be seen to be behaviour that would make them stand out in their community, and that they might, it wasn't something that they wanted to do. And I always respected that. But when I was, as you know, Joy, I mean, when you've got like 3 or 4 profiles up your sleeve, I mean, it's quite fantastic. I visited a friend in France, and I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or 5 o'clock, whatever the time was. I would set my alarm to post it in the middle of the day in Japan for like a week and stuff. But anyway, it was I was very lucky. I had a great team of people helping me, and I think it built a lovely community that I'm really, really proud of.
Good. I love this quote. I think from Savvy Japan, Savvy Tokyo.
Yeah.
It's my own small attempt to show the world the breadth and depth of engagement by Japanese women, and by doing so, highlight the issues that women face in Japan.
Yeah. I think that is the most important piece, because, it's very... I mean, I find sometimes that the stereotypes that people outside Japan have about Japan, but more in this case about Japanese women, were very they were just that, they were stereotypes. And I felt that in some way I wanted to demonstrate that no, there were amazing women doing great work in STEM. There were terrific artists, there are amazing mothers, there are great marketers, there are great, government people and what have you, and that it wasn't just so sort of finite, because it's sort of like the discrimination towards women, which we know exists, but it exists where I come from too. But I don't want people to stop that. I didn't feel that should be the reason that they wouldn't see the incredible work that Japanese women do in spite of that, a lot of the time. So I also think there's a base level of respect for teachers, and for childcare workers. I think that, is not reflected in the pay that they should get. But I think that there's a strong respect for the teaching profession here that sometimes I don't see in Australia, which is disappointing. That's not fair. That's a sweeping statement, but I just feel in Japan that's an area where I think people really do show a level of respect, and I wanted to broaden that and show that I think people respect women for the great work they do throughout Japan.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even though the project is finished, I notice you're continuing on when you see something notable or worth mentioning. There was something during the coronavirus that you retweeted about single mothers, and how it's so much more difficult for single mothers. And we heard stories of women working in hospitals who couldn't send their kids to daycare because of the stigma. And being from Hiroshima, or understanding people from Tohoku, we know about stigma. We know about the problems that created. So
Yeah, and that is actually a really lovely part of celebrating women. Kojima-san, who set up that hitorijanai.org with some of her colleagues. I mean, she's a very powerful, well-known Japanese essayist. She actually is based in Perth and Tokyo, and I know her from way back. But I met her again, and then I asked her if she would be in Celebrating Women, and she was so great, so gracious, and helped me out with that. She came to the launch and what have you at the Australian Embassy, and then she had another role as a goodwill ambassador at the embassy and stuff. And I've kept in contact with her, and she sent me the material about hitorijanai.org, and we're going to put that up on our website so that people know where that they can support people. But it just struck me that the whole pandemic made it difficult for families, but it made it especially difficult for single parents. And as a single parent, I guess it resonated with me too. Yeah.
And that was a great story that you talk about coming to Japan with your two boys as a single mom, and how it gave you an insight into the power of daycare workers and, all the people that supported you so that you could work and your kids could be taken care of. And certainly I have had the same experience, and there's so many women behind the scenes helping raise our children that so grateful.
Yeah, definitely. And, I was working as an interpreter then, and so I wasn't always in charge of the times that I wanted to finish. I remember I was working at the embassy, and it was such a relief to know that I could leave at a time when I could go and pick up the kids from daycare without having to lean on people to go and collect them. But when, of course, it's your own business, it's much easier. But yeah, I still see some of the daycare mums. And they were a big part of my early time in Japan. But, many of them were single mums, actually. So we all just used to band in together and drink a lot, too, together, which was not probably very helpful. But anyway.
Whatever gets you through,
Well, that's indeed the case.
And then another fun thing that came out after coronavirus was you had a few tweets about Koike-san and about the game, the video game.
Yeah. Oh. So that mitsu that she, and that's a really interesting. I think there's a great deal of interest about Governor Koike from outside. I mean, also because she's amazingly talented, and she's trilingual. I think she speaks Arabic and English and Japanese, of course. So, she's remarkable. But I love that they'd made a game about her mitsu desu, her slogan around how we were to manage the coronavirus. Yeah, she's.
And did you see the press conference after the game got some exposure? And she was walking out and she did it.
I love it. Yeah, that was great.
So that shows she has so much strength, right? To have a sense of humor about that.
Well, and then, of course, there were those who said, this is a really difficult time and, she should shush up and all that. And I was like, oh, come on, as if she hasn't put in the hours and the commitment to try and, do the right thing in any case. But, yeah, exactly.
I remember seeing a couple of tweets as well. You were really appreciating her language, the way she was speaking clearly but politely but to the point. And I didn't pick that up, but as a translator, you noticed that, did you?
Well, I also think that's it's an interesting part actually, because there's that whole the respect language. Of course, I remember spending a truckload of time trying to master because I could tell that when I was on a bus, for example, in Hachinohe, I could tell that the bus driver spoke to the children getting on the bus very differently to how he spoke to men sometimes, and how differently he spoke to older people. So I sort of worked out that there must be some thing that I had to master, and another thing to master, because it's such a difficult language, as you know. But anyway, the learning keigo, I guess, has really been important, but it made me understand that, in Australia, when the coronavirus, language that's used is far more direct, and they use the imperative, and it's very clear, and it's very like, no, this mustn't happen, and that is only, whereas in Japan there was this sort of deference and this, we would appreciate it if you wouldn't mind not doing, so there's a lot of softening of the language, which I don't know is always massively effective, but I thought it was a big difference in how people were requested to demonstrate restraint. I don't know in the Japanese language if it would have been better sometimes to have clearer messages around, like, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, but maybe that wouldn't be delivered in the same way because it's not how it's done in Japanese. But I thought it was very interesting. Very different to how it was done in Australia, and definitely different to other countries where they speak English as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Let's talk a little bit about your project, Koala Daichi.
Oh, yeah. Koala Daichi is lovely. So Koala Daichi, I borrowed from the American work that was undertaken after the Tohoku earthquake with Tomodachi. And I was thinking about it, and a bunch of our friends and colleagues, we were sort of really focusing, I guess, on Australia. It was quite a difficult time over Christmas and New Year as the bushfires sort of played out, and people, obviously terrible loss of life, but also loss of property. And then this story that I think resonated with so many people around the world was just the impact that it had on our wildlife, and just the biodiversity impact was so vast. And it really, it was such a painful time, I think, for Australians overseas and Australians in Australia as well, of course. And so we sort of decided that we wanted to do something where we would bring together that group of people. We would look at maybe some areas where we felt that we could highlight sustainable practices that would be more environmentally minded, or at least raising the consciousness about what it was that in Australia I think most people are trying to do. Now that, of course, was quickly moved on after Koala Daichi was established, because then we had the pandemic. So we've just been trying to focus on areas where we see people doing terrific things and stimulus for good and what have you. But it's all under a broader umbrella of Nichigo Network, which is Nichi and Australia. And we're looking to build up a network of Australians who are in Japan and Japanese in Australia. And honorary Australians too, Joy, and people who can learn and help better understanding about the environment and sustainable practices and how we need to learn more, etc., etc.
I was very impressed by your Stimulus for Good page, and so I want to go over that a little bit. Have you just started it? Because
we've just started it.
Oh my gosh, these suggestions are awesome.
They are so lovely. Yeah, I'm really
such
pleased.
Great stories. So you talk about the Smile Food Project that was featured on NHK.
That's right. And, there were so many different projects. I think NHK is just, I do have a go at NHK every Sunday morning when they mostly don't have women on the panel of a certain program. But in general, of course, I'm very supportive of NHK because it brings to life so many fantastic stories about what Japanese people are doing. And that project was one I saw, and I just thought it was terrific.
So they're providing food for the hospital staff, is that right?
The hospital staff. So they were basically taking, I think it was Komatsuna? There was veggie suppliers in Tokyo. They would normally have the contract to supply the school lunches and the like. Nobody was obviously at school, so then the veggies were going to be thrown away. And so I think some local people said, well, why don't we make lunches that we could take to the local hospitals so that they don't have to go out and then go back in and get their bentos and the like. And it was just such Japan has so many of those community-based stories or community-based activities, I think. And you see a lot of that in the work that you do. And I think that that's really important to highlight.
It's
But the
beautiful,
stimulus,
and everybody using, such healthy ingredients. Plus,
totally,
I did
yeah,
notice the containers they're using are the biodegradable kind.
they are the
It's
biodegradable ones,
very
exactly.
good.
Yeah, I
And
thought so.
they're so happy. They make you happy just looking at it. Smile
Yeah,
Food Project is so
I know.
cute.
It's really lovely. But I took the stimulus for good. I'm poaching ideas left, right, and centre. But that was from some people that I work with. They have a foundation, and they put out a sort of PDF early on about ideas of things that people were doing. And one of them, I think, in Australia was people were leaving sort of grocery items, non-perishables, in boxes, and just saying people should take them if they needed them, or people had books in boxes that they were just taking, and they were under the eaves of somebody's garden, and they could just collect them, and they let everyone know. So we just thought it would be a really nice way of highlighting what great stuff is happening in our own communities in spite of such tricky times. Yeah,
Definitely. I love
yeah,
this Let Tokyo Eat Cake
I
initiative.
know that that yeah,
That is
the
incredible. It's a
I
guy,
know.
I don't know his background, but he's making banana carrot cake, and people can buy it, and then he'll deliver it no matter where you are in Tokyo, and then he
Yeah, and so it's sort of
donates,
like it's a treat, and then he
right,
donates part of that. So it's
donated
you want to,
500,000 yen to Second
yeah,
Harvest.
I know. It's amazing. He's just remarkable. And we've only got a small number of people who are on the newsletter at this stage, but it was nice when when Christina and Eve, who helped me greatly on the preparation of all of this stuff, they were putting it together, and I said, oh, why don't we send it to that one, and why don't we send it to this person and this person, and I said, oh, do you mind, because I don't want to bombard people and put them on mailing lists and the like, and we just said, oh, would you like to be part of this? And everyone was just straight up, yes, definitely want to be part of it, because it was nice to hear good stories at such
Yeah.
a
Do you
a
have
time
an
when
email sign up area on your website? Because that would be great if people could just sign up with their
that's very
email
true. I
and
think we do.
get the newsletter.
Yeah. If we don't, we will we will have by tomorrow. Hope
Yay.
I'm sure people who know how to do those things in my organisation will know who.
Right. Because
So yeah, no,
I
that's
thought it was fantastic. And there's,
well, that's nice.
of course, all the supporting of community. That's a big part of sustainability. That's so
Absolutely.
important. Without
Well, I must
supporting
say,
people, we don't have a future, right?
yeah, well, I watch what you do and your cleanups and all of
Oh,
your stuff. I mean,
thank you.
we really should be doing so much more in Tokyo. But I always look at your stuff and think, oh, how fantastic. And apart from anything else, it looks idyllic down there.
It is beautiful. You
Yeah,
can't complain when you're out on a beautiful day next to the water, picking up some
yeah.
trash. It's okay.
No, it's
We have
it's
just a
super
few more minutes.
beautiful.
I wanted to talk about you being part of the W20. That's kind of exciting.
That is exciting, actually. And this year, unfortunately, we probably won't get to meet as a group in person. This year, the G20 is being hosted by Saudi Arabia, and we were all due to go to Saudi Arabia. But we have been working a lot with the delegates, and so we've had a lot more engagement in the last little while. I'm on the Australia's delegation with two fantastic women based in Australia. Last year, with Japan hosting the G20, a mutual friend, I think, suggested that I might be the person to have so that I could then work in Japan as well. So I'm very, very lucky because it's giving me a viewpoint completely separate from Japan now, but builds on the stuff that I have learned. So I'm really enjoying that. And next year, Italy is our destination. So yes to that.
Yeah, good. I hope it happens. So the W20 is a group of women sending initiatives which help gender equality and stuff to the G20. How does it work exactly?
Yeah. So the G20 is obviously established, and so therefore the countries that are represented in the G20 have a B20 group. They also have a T20 and a C20, and then we're the W20. So that's the women group. We do have a male representative for France, a delegate, But the rest of our group is at the moment looking at how women, or how we need to have a gender lens when we're considering the response to COVID-19 and how we should move forward on those issues as well. So it's been fascinating watching, unfortunately for all of us, I guess, the G20 original leaders statement didn't have any mention of gender, which, I think people are now realising needs to change, especially given how women are impacted in this pandemic, both on the front line, but also in terms of as family members and workers, etc. So
Definitely.
yeah.
I mean, they found that if you support the women, you support society, because the women are taking care of the children, are paying for education. In Japan, they are buying the food, so
Totally. Yeah.
we know
And
that's
I think
true around the world, right?
yeah, exactly. So, but it's interesting seeing, the politics behind it, but also how as a group, the other night we had a Zoom call with 60 or 70 delegates from all of the various countries, and we're all talking. We probably wouldn't have that opportunity, and we might have only ever met in the regular meetings. So it's probably giving us a lot more engagement than we would have had anyway.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the silver lining in that.
Good. In some ways, the digital push of everybody working from home, using computers in that way, it seems to be a gender equalizer, especially in Japan,
I
right?
think so. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's very hard. You've got people who have got, impact, in that they don't have the place within their homes to have a home office, or, an Australian friend of mine was talking on a Zoom call and said, oh, sometimes when I am stressed, I just jump in the swimming pool. And I was like, oh, don't talk about the swimming pool, but, because Japanese don't have access to pools just like that.
But we have great hikes and walks and
exactly, and lots of and
bicycle rides.
But I do think that there has been great change take place during the pandemic, and I guess it's up to people who use the news services and whatever those news services might be. It's up to us to be really part of that change and to direct it the way that we need it to go.
On a final note, we didn't have time to go into it in detail, but if you have a manel, watch out, because Melanie will find you and she'll put you on Twitter.
Well, I don't, because some of the people who are actually on the manels are people that I've worked with, so I always feel terrible. But
it's not only Japan too. She'll find you everywhere.
Terrible. I mean, we saw an example of it in Australia yesterday, and I thought, oh goodness, I should probably do a piece on this, but I probably won't. But no, it would be terrific to see more women in politics in Japan, because then when they have programs where they have, then you'd have more representation and the like. So
absolutely,
hopefully
51%, right?
Exactly.
51% of a panel should be women, because that's who is here.
Yeah. But, there's a bit of a movement in Australia, and as I say, it doesn't always work exactly as we would like. But, there's a push for people who have been asked to go on a particular panel to always ask what the diversity or the gender split will be. And then I know quite a few people who say, look, I just, I can't. You go back and find now the right people to be on that, and we'll be on it. So good. That's a good
shift, isn't it? Yeah.
Well,
that is our hour. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Thank you. All the best, and congratulations on an incredible
series. Thank you so much. I give credit to you for the idea of reaching out to people doing good things and trying to highlight what other people are doing as a way to move forward during this coronavirus. So thank you so much for the inspiration.
Doing all the hard yards now, so I hope everybody watching signs up and keeps supporting it.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for watching. And we had a few comments. Looked like people were enjoying it, but no questions. So sorry we didn't have time to address everybody. Tomorrow, again at 5 o'clock, we're talking to Robin Lewis, who has created the MyMizu app. It's very exciting. And Social Innovation Japan. So please join us again tomorrow at 5 and Friday at 5 as well. So thank you so much.
Lovely.
And have a good day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Angela.